One last thing to show you before we go into Béranger's church. This little round window is obviously providing light for a curved room. The puzzle is to find the room. We'll have a hunt when we're inside the church. Terribilis est locus iste. This place is terrible. So many people insist on misinterpreting this as if it was Saunière uttering some sort of dreadful warning. But in fact, this is terrible, dreadful, in the sense of awesome. It's a quote from Genesis, Jacob's dream of the ladder ascending into heaven. How dreadful is this place? And Béranger has given us the rest of the quotation. Hic domus Dei est et porta coelis. This is the house of God, and these are the gates of heaven. I've seen this same quotation on the walls of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But there's a much more intriguing quotation here if you want to play the game of interpretation. Domus mea, domus orationis vocabiter. My house shall be called the house of prayer. But Saunière was a priest. He would have known what came next. Do you? But you have made it a den of thieves. Let the treasure hunters think about that. It's not every church where you're greeted by the devil. Although I'm used to him, I must admit he disturbs me still, though now for a rather different reason. In 1996, somebody knocked off his head and stole it. This is a somewhat unfortunate replacement. Why can't people respect the gifts which our predecessors have left us? Why must they satisfy their delusions by such acts of vandalism? However, I must accept my share of the responsibility for these stupidities. I know that I'm largely responsible for attracting the world to this place, the mad as well as the sane. Mea culpa. Even with his new head, though, our little devil is more than interesting. Saunière is giving us some curious imagery here, and it's direct from the Middle Ages. Now let's look at this group in more detail. The devil, of course, is Rex Mundi, Lord of the Earth, and he's holding up the holy water stoup. Then there's B.S., Béranger Saunière, perhaps. Some say that it's a reference to the two local rivers, the Blanc and the Salse, and indeed, where the two rivers join, they form a gentle sort of whirlpool, which the locals call le bénitier, the holy water stoup. Next, the inscription, par ce signe tu le vaincras. In this sign ye shall conquer him. He is obviously the devil. And the sign is the sign of the cross being made by the angels at the top. Angels, pure spirit, or air. It all makes another sort of sense when you take into account the little decorative beasts. Again, small details which people are inclined to overlook. The beasts are salamanders, who are mythical creatures born out of fire. Why did Saunière choose to have them put there? Earth, water, fire, air. The four elements of all Hermetic thought, of alchemy. Now, why should a priest at the beginning of the 20th century be giving us so strange and ancient a hint? But again, we're into guesswork. Back in the early 70s, when I began work on this story, it was a treasure hunt, and this little devil was interpreted as the indicator of a place, the hiding place of Saunière's treasure, the X that marks the spot. He's squatting a little uncomfortably, notice, as if he ought to have a chair. But where is it? And he's making this strange gesture with his hand, a circle. Well, on the hillside above the sister village of Rennes-les-Bains, there's this rock. It's carved into the shape of a throne, and it's known as the fauteuil du diable, the devil's armchair. And beside it, there is this little spring, the source du cercle, the spring of the circle. I don't doubt that a great deal of time has been wasted thrashing around on that mountainside by treasure hunters pursuing their own particular fantasies. But the church is full of such details, which you can look at and enjoy interpreting without having to climb mountains or hack your way through undergrowth. I'll show you a few of the more obvious, if generally overlooked, curiosities. As far as I'm concerned, these are just entertaining oddities, some of them more interesting than others. Some of you may find fun in attempting interpretations. All I can say is, good luck. The stations of the cross are filled with details, and from them a fertile imagination can conjure all sorts of possibilities. For instance, Station 1, Pilate washes his hands. There's a little Negro holding a white dish for him to do the washing. But this is a French story, and we must interpret in French and not in English. And in French, a white dish is un plateau blanc. Now, on the road to Rennes-les-Bains, Blanchefort, the white castle, sits on its plateau above Rocco Negro, the black rock. Are we being encouraged to thrash about on that brambly mountainside? Perhaps. Blanchefort is certainly worth climbing, for the view. And there's going to be another reason why Blanchefort might be worth considering. But as far as Station 1 is concerned, I find somewhat more interesting the curious gesture of this gentleman in the background. Why is he turning his back on the action? And why is he holding what appears to be a golden egg? Station 8 has a child wearing what appears to be a tartan nappy. There are those who suggest that this is a reference to Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Well, who am I to argue? Station 14 intrigues me most. This is the last station. It's always Jesus is laid into the grave. Well, there you are. But have you noticed that there's a moon in a night dark sky? Béranger Saunière was a priest. He knew the Gospels better than I do, and yet he allowed this. It's strange. The Bible tells us that Jesus had to be buried before nightfall because the Sabbath drew on. But this is night. This is later. Is Saunière telling us that the Gospel account is wrong? Or is he showing us something that happened in the night? Not Jesus being laid into the grave, but Jesus being carried out again. This, of course, would be an outrageous suggestion to most people. Nevertheless, it's a night sky. And Saunière wouldn't have made such an obvious error if he hadn't meant to. And it makes me wonder. Such ideas, of course, are heretical. But let me show you one other hint of heresy which is staring you in the face. Behind me, on my left, is Mary holding baby Jesus. Now, on my right, Joseph is holding another baby Jesus. Two baby Jesuses. Did you know that in the early church it was believed that Jesus had a twin? The Gospel of Thomas is illuminating on the subject. And in passing, it's worth mentioning that Thomas, which is so common now, was not in the Bible a name. It is in fact the Hebrew word for twin. In the Gospels we also meet Thomas Didymus. Now, Didymus is the Greek word for twin. So he was twin. But the twin of who? In the early church, it was believed that he was the twin of Jesus. So could this be what Béranger believed? Or are we building a mountain of mystery out of a molehill of serendipitous coincidence? For there's no denying he liked playing games of mystification. Let me show you the sacristy, which is where the priest puts on his clothes before the service. Now, why do you suppose he would have hidden away the door to that room in the back of a cupboard? It's the little curved room we saw outside with the round window. What sort of game was he playing? I don't suppose we'll ever know. But we haven't finished with the details in the church yet. This is a statue of St. Anthony of Padua. He's supported by 4 angels in pretty dresses. You, the congregation, can see 3 of them. The one round the back, which only the priest gets to see, is wearing a slit skirt. Just a matter of fashion, perhaps? Of course, there are those who would like to remind us that in Freemasonic initiation ceremonies, a bared knee has some significance. Here at the altar is a picture of St. Mary Magdalene, to whom the church is dedicated. She's praying in a cave. It's said that the view through the cave mouth was painted by Saunière himself. And that view is intriguingly like the one we saw on the road up to the village. Is this meant to be a crude depiction of the ruin of Custosa Castle butting against the mountain of Cardu? And if it is, what are we to make of it? Should we be looking for a cave which has just that view? A cave with something hidden in it, perhaps? Buried treasure again. How the fantasy muscles begin to twitch. Curiously, at the opposite end of the church, there's another view which seems to give substance to this unlikely but tempting idea. Christ succours the afflicted. There he is, surrounded by the halt, the lame, and the sick. Venez à moi, vous tous qui souffrez et qui êtes accablés, et je vous soulagerai. Come unto me, all ye who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. As with all the other supposed clues in this church, the unsuspecting visitor sees nothing untoward. Everything makes a sort of superficial sense. But in this story, one must learn not only to look, but to see. And what can we see? Well, Jesus stands on a little pointed hill. To the left, there's a hilltop village. To the right, a ruined castle. The hill is sprinkled with rather unnatural-looking clumps of flowers. In French, one might say that it's un terrain fleuri, a flowery landscape. And here's another coincidence. As you come along the valley to the east, you can see this view. The pointed hill in the middle is called Roc Fumade, and once it belonged to a family called Fleury. It's un terrain fleuri. To the left, there's a hilltop village, Rennes Le Chateau, and to the right, a ruined castle, Custosa. Serendipity, perhaps. But here's a curious thing. At the foot of the pointed hill, there's a money bag, so full that it's burst open. Should we pay any attention to such an irrelevant little detail? Well, perhaps. Let's look again at the inscription. Come unto me, all ye who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Just what you'd expect Nothing unusual there. Or is there? That phrase is usually rendered in French, Venez à moi, vous tous qui souffrez et qui êtes affligés, et je vous soulagerai. Saunière has changed one word. Affligé has become accablé. The meaning is the same, but one word has changed. Again, should we pay any attention to the change? And again, perhaps. We've looked. Now we must see. And can you see that there's a faint white line linking the S of et with the word accablé? And the letters are written slightly smaller. Saccablé is being pointed out, and saccablé means sack of corn. And corn in French slang, like bread in English, can mean money. Look at the money bag, he's saying. Many years ago, all this was read as a hint that somewhere on the pointed hill there was a cave from which it would be possible to see the view from within the cave shown in the altar painting. Well, it's all fun, and it's highly unlikely. But let me show you one decipherment which did lead to a profitable conclusion. Station 6. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Here it is in de Sède's illustrated Trésor Maudit. It has a curious caption. Au bouclier, demi-tour, dôme, Veronica au lin, Simon regarde. No explanation, nothing in the book. I wondered what it meant. High shield, half a tower, dome, Veronica with the cloth, Simon is looking. It didn't seem to make any sense. After all these years, it's hard to remember the exact chain of thoughts which led to the decipherment. But something made me realize that the second phrase, demi-tour, was ambiguous. Yes, it means half tower, but it also means a half turn. I began to play with the first phrase, au bouclier, high shield. It made the same sound as au bouclier, at the tied goat, but that didn't make any sense at all. I got as far as au bout, at the bottom of, but that left me with clier, which didn't seem to mean anything. I looked it up in every French dictionary I could lay my hands on. I even asked my French friends if they knew the word, but everywhere I drew a blank. Perhaps I should just have accepted that there was no such word. I suppose most sane people would, but there was that scent in my nostrils, and I never ignore that instinctive feel. And then I realized that not many English dictionaries would have the word swink, which I remembered from Chaucer. It's an Old English word that means work, labour, toil. So I turned to a dictionary of Old French, and there it was, clier, clôture, an enclosure. Au bouclier, demi-tour. Au bout, clier, demi-tour. At the bottom of the enclosure, make a half turn. Now I felt I might be getting somewhere, so I tried the rest. I have to confess that dome has never made any sense to me, and it remains a puzzle. But the rest of de Sède's caption fell into place. Veronica au lin, Veronica with the cloth, becomes vers au nid caolin. Vers au nid, towards the high nest. Mountains are often referred to in French as nid d'aigle, eagles' nests. So towards a high nest, towards a mountain. And kaolin is kaolin, china clay. Now it did make sense. Go to the bottom of the enclosure and make a half turn towards the china clay mountain. Simon regarde. Simon is looking. But it's also Sim on regarde, the crest you are looking at. It was 1970 when I made this decipherment, and I'd never yet visited the village. It was quite a thrill when I got there in February of 1971 to find that there was only one enclosed area in the village. It was the cemetery, and the bizarre caption fitted it exactly. Go to the bottom of the enclosure. Make a half turn towards the high china clay hill. And there was Cardu. And yes, I was told it's a mountain of kaolin. And I could see a crest. The trees have grown up since, but here's the shot I took on that first visit. That ridge is Blanchefort. The crest you are looking at. That's what's important. Sitting here many years later, I realised that in fact I hadn't got it quite right. But I'll explain that later. Before we leave the church, let me show you a few more little details that have produced much food for singularly fruitless thought. In this window, the raised hand of Jesus is almost touching a palm tree. It's been suggested that the palm tree looks more like a spider. Now, in French, a spider is araignée, and in the thick local accent, araignée sounds just like araignée, which means at Rennes. Wonderful. Well, entertaining, certainly. In the south wall of the church is this window, showing the raising of Lazarus. It contains some tiny blue circles. Béranger carefully had the window set into the wall at a very curious angle. At special times, the light cuts directly through to cast these blue circles onto the altar. A lot of ink has been spilled about the famous parchment message of blue apples. Will these do?